The leash tangled around Yuri Sinclair's ankles just as his phone rang with the call he'd been waiting on all morning. Balancing the device against his ear, he awkwardly hopped on one foot while his enthusiastic golden retriever puppy, Max, continued his excited circles around him. "Yes, this is Sinclair," Yuri managed to answer, his voice straining with the effort to stay upright. His free hand fumbled with the leash. "The property on 5th, I'm prepared to make a solid offer." Max barked joyfully, oblivious to his owner's predicament, as Yuri finally freed himself from the leash prison. At just 6 months old, Max was a bundle of energy that Yuri, despite owning 3 luxury hotels across the country, was completely unprepared for. "I understand the asking price," Yuri continued, running his hand through his dark hair as he scanned Central Park's dog area. "But given the market conditions, I think my offer is more than fair." Max pulled sharply, nearly yanking Yuri off his Italian leather shoes. The puppy had spotted another dog, a fluffy white Samoyed that was calmly sitting beside a young woman on a nearby bench. The woman was absorbed in a book, her honey blonde hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. "I'll call you back," Yuri muttered into his phone as Max dragged him toward the other dog with surprising strength. The Samoyed turned her head, her dark eyes studying Max with calm interest as he approached. Unlike Max's chaotic energy, she remained perfectly poised. "I'm so sorry," Yuri called out to the woman as Max bounded up to her dog. "He's still learning his manners." The woman looked up from her book and Yuri felt an unexpected jolt. Her eyes were a striking shade of green, and her smile was genuine in a way he rarely encountered in his business circles. "No problem at all," she replied, closing her book. "Luna loves making friends. She's just better at hiding her excitement." As if to prove her wrong, Luna suddenly stood and playfully bowed toward Max, who responded with a delighted bounce. "I'm Lily, by the way," she said, extending her hand. "Lily Owens, and this is Luna, Yuri Sinclair. This overexcited troublemaker is Max." He shook her hand, noticing the calluses on her palm, unusual for the women he typically met. "Not exactly the dignified companion I was promised when I got him." Lily laughed, the sound surprisingly melodic. "You can't expect dignity from a puppy. They're pure joy with 4 paws and a tail." "I'm learning that the hard way," Yuri admitted, taking a seat beside her as the dogs played. "I travel a lot for work, but my sister convinced me that a dog would make my apartment feel more like a home. I'm not sure she considered how much training would be involved." "What do you do that keeps you traveling so much?" Lily asked, her gaze curious but not probing in the way he was used to. Most people in New York recognized his name from business magazines or charity galas. "I develop and manage hotels," he said simply, leaving out the scale of his operation. There was something refreshing about the way she looked at him, like he was just another dog owner in the park. "What about you? What do you do when you're not supervising canine playgroups?" "I'm a veterinarian," Lily said. "I work at the downtown animal hospital." "Actually, I'm on my lunch break right now." She glanced at her watch, "which is almost over." Yuri felt an unusual reluctance to end their conversation. "Max needs his vaccinations updated. Maybe I could bring him to your clinic," Lily smiled, tucking her book into her bag. "We're actually booked solid for the next few weeks," but she hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "We come here most days around this time. If Max needs some socialization, Luna's a good influence." "We'll be here," Yuri said, surprised by how quickly he'd made the commitment. His assistant would have a fit about rearranging his schedule, but watching Max frolic with Luna, he couldn't bring himself to care. As Lily stood to leave, Luna obediently returning to her side, Yuri found himself already looking forward to tomorrow's lunch hour. True to his word, Yuri adjusted his schedule. The next day found him back at the same bench, Max eagerly scanning the park entrance for his new friend. When Luna appeared, Max nearly pulled Yuri's arm from its socket in his excitement. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Lily said as she approached, Luna trotting elegantly beside her. "I told my assistant it was an important business meeting," Yuri replied with a half smile. "I wasn't lying. Max and Luna have serious matters to discuss." As they sat watching the dogs play, Yuri found himself talking about things he rarely discussed: his childhood in Boston, his passion for architecture that led to his hotel designs, even his frustration with the corporate world he navigated daily. "It sounds like you've built something impressive," Lily observed after he mentioned his latest acquisition, a historical hotel in Chicago he was renovating. "Do you enjoy it?" The question caught him off guard. Yes, of course." But even as he said it, he realized he couldn't remember the last time he genuinely enjoyed his work rather than just chasing the next success. "How about you? Did you always want to be a veterinarian?" he asked, turning the focus away from himself. Lily's eyes lit up. "Since I was 8 and nursed a baby bird back to health. My parents thought it was a phase, but here I am, 15 years of schooling later, still getting excited about animal wellness exams." Her passion was palpable, and Yuri found himself envying it. Their conversations continued daily for the next week, and each day, Yuri found himself checking his watch constantly before their meeting time. On Friday, rain threatened their routine. Yuri arrived at the park anyway, an umbrella in hand, but the dog area was nearly empty. He was about to leave when he spotted Lily hurrying along the path, Luna beside her. "I thought you might not come," she called out, reaching him just as the first drops began to fall. "I promised Max his playtime," Yuri replied, opening his umbrella and holding it over both of them. Their shoulders touched as they huddled together. "There's a pet-friendly cafe just outside the park," Lily suggested, looking up at him with raindrops clinging to her eyelashes. "Maybe we could continue our conversation there." The cafe was cozy and warm, with a section specifically designed for patrons with pets. As they settled at a corner table, the dogs curling up together underneath, Yuri realized he hadn't felt this comfortable with someone in years. "So, Mr. Hotel Magnate," Lily said after they ordered, "what made you decide to build your empire?" Yuri winced slightly at her casual reference to his wealth. "Is it that obvious?" Lily laughed. "I Googled you after our second meeting. Yuri Sinclair, hospitality industry prodigy. The articles were quite flattering. And yet you still showed up the next day," Yuri observed, studying her. "Most women who discovered his net worth changed their behavior immediately." "Luna enjoys Max's company," Lily said with a shrug, but her smile held something more. "And I enjoy yours. Though I admit, the private jet and the penthouse apartment are a bit intimidating." "They're just things," Yuri said, surprised by how much he wanted her to see beyond his wealth. "I started with nothing but a small inheritance from my grandfather and a lot of determination. The money came later, but it's never been what drives me." "What does drive you?" Lily asked, stirring her tea. Yuri considered the question seriously. "Creating spaces where people feel welcome. My first hotel was small, but guests would tell me it felt like coming home. That's what I've tried to maintain, even as everything expanded." Their conversation flowed easily from there, transitioning from business philosophies to favorite books, childhood memories, and even their shared love of old jazz music. When they finally noticed the time, 3 hours had passed. "I can't believe it's so late," Lily exclaimed, gathering Luna's leash. "I have early appointments tomorrow. Let me drive you home," Yuri offered, reluctant to end their time together. "With what car? We both walked here," Lily pointed out. Yuri pulled out his phone. "I can have my driver here in 5 minutes." Lily hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but only because Luna's tired." The sleek black SUV that arrived was understated but clearly expensive. Lily seemed slightly uncomfortable as they settled in the back, the dogs curled together on the floor. "This is a far cry from the subway I usually take," she admitted. "If it helps, I grew up taking public transportation too," Yuri said. "My father was a math teacher, my mother a librarian. I didn't see the inside of a car like this until I was 25. Something in Lily's expression softened. "It does help, actually. Sometimes it's hard to remember that everyone starts somewhere." When they reached her building, a modest apartment complex in a working-class neighborhood, Yuri walked her to the door. Standing there with their dogs at their feet, he felt unusually nervous. "Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night?" he asked. "A real dinner, not just a rain alternative dog playdate." Lily looked up at him, those green eyes searching his face. Like a date. Exactly like a date, Yuri confirmed, his heart racing unexpectedly. She smiled and the tension in his chest eased. I'd like that. The next evening, Yuri arrived at Lily's apartment precisely at 7. He'd chosen a restaurant that was excellent, but not ostentatious, a small Italian place he loved for its authenticity rather than its exclusivity. When Lily opened her door, Yuri momentarily lost his ability to speak. She wore a simple green dress that matched her eyes, her hair loose around her shoulders. You look beautiful, he finally managed. Lily smiled, looking a little self-conscious. Thank you. It's not often I trade my scrubs for a dress. You look perfect in both, Yuri said honestly, offering his arm. Dinner was everything Yuri had hoped for. The food was excellent, but it was their conversation that made the evening special. Unlike his previous dates, there was no awkward silence, no careful posturing. Lily asked thoughtful questions and listened intently to his answers. She shared stories of difficult cases at the clinic and her dreams of someday opening an animal sanctuary. I've been saving for years, she explained over dessert, but property in or near the city is so expensive. I might have to look further upstate. I may know some real estate developers who could help, Yuri offered cautiously, not wanting to overstep. No strings attached, just connections. Lily's expression grew serious. That's kind, but I need to do this my way. I've worked for everything I have. Yuri nodded, respecting her independence. I understand, just know the offer stands. After dinner, they walked along the riverfront, their hands naturally finding each other. The city lights reflected on the water, creating a perfect backdrop. Can I ask you something? Lily said as they paused to look at the skyline. Anything. With all your success, are you happy? The question caught him off guard for the second time. He stopped, considering his answer carefully. I'm accomplished. I've achieved more than I ever thought possible. That's not what I asked, Lily said gently. Yuri looked down at their intertwined fingers. Until this week, I would have said yes without hesitation. But spending time with you and seeing how passionate you are about your work, it's made me realize something's been missing. He turned to face her fully. When was the last time you saw me check my phone? Lily blinked, surprised by the question. I don't think I have, actually. Exactly. For the first time in years, I'm not constantly thinking about work or the next deal. I'm just present. Without overthinking, he leaned forward and kissed her, softly at first, then more deeply as she responded. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Lily smiled up at him. For a millionaire businessman, you're surprisingly good at that. It might be my finest skill, Yuri joked, pulling her closer. The following weeks passed in a blur of joy for Yuri. He rearranged meetings and delegated tasks to spend more time with Lily. They established a routine mornings in the dog park, occasional lunches at the cafe, and dinners whenever their schedules aligned. He visited her at the clinic one day, watching with admiration as she gently treated a nervous cat with infinite patience. On a particularly beautiful Saturday, Yuri suggested a weekend trip to his beach house on Long Island. Lily hesitated initially, but the promise of seeing the dogs play in the ocean convinced her. The beach house was elegant but comfortable, with large windows overlooking the water. Lily stood on the deck, watching as Max and Luna chased each other along the shore. This is incredible, she said as Yuri joined her, handing her a glass of wine. Do you come here often? Not as much as I should, he admitted, wrapping an arm around her waist. I bought it 3 years ago, but I've probably only spent a total of 2 weeks here. Lily leaned into him. That's a shame. It's too beautiful to sit empty. That evening, after a dinner Yuri cooked himself, surprising Lily with his culinary skills, they sat by a fire pit on the beach. The stars were brilliant above them, the sound of waves creating a peaceful backdrop. I have a confession, Lily said, curled against his side. When I first Googled you, I almost didn't come back to the park. Yuri tensed slightly. Why not? I saw the women you've dated before. Models, socialites, a senator's daughter. She looked up at him. I'm just a veterinarian with student loans and a tiny apartment. I thought you'd get bored. Yuri turned to face her, taking her hands in his. Lily, those relationships never worked because they were never real. They were convenient, socially appropriate matches that looked good in photographs. He stroked her cheek gently. With you, for the first time, I'm just Yuri. Not the CEO, not the millionaire, just a guy who can barely control his dog and who's falling completely in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, unplanned but utterly true. For a moment, Yuri worried he'd said too much too soon, but then Lily's eyes filled with tears. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered, leaning forward to kiss him. That night, as they made love with the sound of the ocean in the background, Yuri knew his life had fundamentally changed. Their return to the city brought the first real challenge to their relationship. A major deal Yuri had been working on for months suddenly required his presence in Los Angeles. He would need to be there for at least 2 weeks. I'll fly back whenever I can, he promised as they stood in his penthouse the night before his departure. And you could join me for a weekend, Lily shook her head. I can't just leave the clinic. My patients need me. I understand, Yuri said, though the thought of not seeing her for 2 weeks left an unexpected ache. We'll make it work. The separation proved more difficult than anticipated. Time zone differences limited their calls, and Yuri's days were consumed with meetings and negotiations. He missed their daily walks with the dogs, missed seeing her smile across the table. A week into his trip, the deal hit a major obstacle. Yuri found himself working 18-hour days, sleeping at the office, and barely managing quick texts to Lily. When she called one evening, he answered distracted and terse, his mind still on the contracts he'd been reviewing. You sound stressed, Lily said, concern evident in her voice. I am, Yuri admitted, running a hand over his face. This whole deal might fall apart. Maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing, Lily suggested. You sound exhausted. Yuri felt a flash of irritation. This is worth $30 million, Lily. I can't just walk away because I'm tired. I wasn't suggesting that, Lily replied, her voice cooling slightly. I just meant your health matters too. The conversation ended awkwardly, and Yuri felt guilty afterward but was too consumed with work to properly apologize. 3 days later, he finally secured the deal, triumphant but exhausted. His return flight to New York was delayed, adding to his frustration. By the time he reached his penthouse, it was past midnight. Max greeted him enthusiastically. He'd been staying with Yuri's sister during his absence, but the apartment felt oddly empty. The next morning, Yuri texted Lily, asking to meet at their usual spot in the park. When he arrived, she was already there, Luna sitting calmly beside her. The sight of her made his heart race, 2 weeks of separation feeling like an eternity. Welcome back, she said as he approached, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I missed you, he said simply, bending to kiss her. She returned the kiss, but he sensed a reservation. As they walked through the park, the dogs happily reunited, Yuri could feel something had shifted between them. Finally, he stopped, turning to face her. What's wrong? And don't say nothing. Lily sighed, looking out at the park rather than at him. While you were gone, I had a lot of time to think about us, about our lives. Yuri felt a cold fear settle in his stomach. And your world and mine are so different, Yuri. When you were away, it hit me how different. You're flying across the country making $1 million deals, and I'm cleaning up after sick puppies. That doesn't matter to me, Yuri insisted, reaching for her hand. But it will, Lily said softly. Maybe not today, but eventually. You'll need someone who fits into your world, who can attend those charity galas and business dinners without feeling like an imposter. That's ridiculous, Yuri said, a hint of anger in his voice. I've never asked you to be anything other than yourself. Not directly, no, Lily conceded. But your lifestyle, it's so far from mine. The private jets, the penthouses, the beach houses that sit empty, I saved for months for a weekend trip upstate. Yuri ran a hand through his hair in frustration. So what are you saying? That we can't be together because I have money and you don't. I'm saying I don't know if we can bridge that gap, Lily replied, her eyes finally meeting his. I love you, Yuri, but I'm afraid that's not enough. Before he could respond, her pager beeped an emergency at the clinic. With a sad smile, she called Luna to her side and walked away, leaving Yuri standing in the middle of the park, Max whining confusedly beside him. The next few days passed in a blur of misery for Yuri. He threw himself back into work, but for the first time it brought no satisfaction. He kept picking up his phone to text Lily, only to put it down again. Her words haunted him, not because they were cruel, but because he feared they might be true. On the third evening, as he sat in his penthouse staring out at the city lights, Max placed his head on Yuri's knee, looking up with sad eyes. The dog missed Luna and clearly missed Lily too. "I know, buddy," Yuri said, scratching behind Max's ears. "I miss them too." That night, unable to sleep, Yuri wandered through his expansive apartment. He'd always been proud of it, with its designer furniture and spectacular views. Now it felt cold and impersonal. There were no photos on the walls, no meaningful mementos, nothing that spoke of a life well lived, only of wealth well displayed. By morning, Yuri had made a decision. He called his assistant and cleared his schedule for the day, then made several other calls in rapid succession. At noon, he and Max headed to the downtown animal hospital. The receptionist recognized him immediately. "Mr. Sinclair, do you have an appointment?" "No," Yuri admitted, "but I need to see Dr. Owens. It's important." "She's with a patient right now, but I can wait," Yuri said, taking a seat in the waiting room with Max at his feet. 45 minutes later, Lily emerged from an exam room, consulting a chart. When she looked up and saw him, she froze. "Yuri, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you, please." Lily glanced at her watch. "I have another appointment in 10 minutes. "I'll take 5, Yuri promised. She led him to her small office, closing the door behind them. "What's this about?" Instead of answering immediately, Yuri handed her an envelope. Confused, Lily opened it, her eyes widening as she read the contents. "What is this?" she asked, looking up at him. "It's a deed to a property in Westchester County. 20 acres, a farmhouse, and several outbuildings, perfect for an animal sanctuary." Yuri held up his hand as she started to protest. "It's not from me. I just helped facilitate it. It's a grant from the Sinclair Foundation, my charitable organization, to establish a wildlife rehabilitation and domestic animal rescue center. The foundation is looking for a qualified veterinarian to run it. The position comes with a reasonable salary and housing on the property." Lily stared at him, speechless. "You don't have to answer now," Yuri continued, "but before you decide, there's something else you should know." He took a deep breath. "You were right about some things. My life has been out of balance. I've been chasing success without really thinking about happiness, but you were wrong about us." He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't need someone who fits into my world, Lily. I need someone who makes me want to create a better one. Since I met you, I've been happier than I can ever remember being, not because of what I have, but because of who I'm with." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Yuri, I'm not finished," he said gently. "This morning I called my board of directors. I'm stepping back from daily operations. I'll remain involved strategically, but I'm appointing a new CEO to handle the day-to-day. I want a life with meaning, Lily. I want a life with you." "What about your work, your success?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll still have plenty to do," Yuri assured her, "but on my terms. I'm thinking about focusing more on the foundation, maybe developing some sustainable tourism projects I've been researching, and if you'll let me helping with that animal sanctuary." Lily looked down at the papers in her hands, then back up at him. "This is a lot to process." "I know," Yuri acknowledged, "and I'm not asking for an answer right now. I just needed you to know that the gap you're worried about, it's not as wide as you think. And I'm willing to meet you more than halfway." Lily set the papers down on her desk and moved toward him. "I missed you," she admitted, her eyes searching his face. "I kept telling myself it was for the best, that eventually you'd see we were too different. But every time I took Luna to the park, I kept looking for you and Max." Yuri gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "We're different, yes, but maybe that's why we work. You keep me grounded. You remind me what matters. And you push me to dream bigger than I thought possible," Lily said, smiling through her tears. "So what do you think?" Yuri asked, his heart pounding. "Are our differences too much, or are they just enough?" In answer, Lily stretched up on her tiptoes and kissed him, her arms wrapping around his neck. When they finally parted, both breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "Just enough," she whispered. "Definitely just enough." 6 months later, Yuri stood on the front porch of the renovated farmhouse, watching as Lily directed volunteers around the newly constructed animal enclosures. The sanctuary was taking shape, with the first residents 3 retired racehorses and a blind goat already settled in. Max and Lunar raced around the property, delighted with the expanded space for their play sessions. Yuri's life had transformed in ways he'd never imagined. He split his time between the sanctuary, his foundation work, and selective projects for his company. For the first time, he felt a true balance. Lily spotted him watching and jogged over, her cheeks flushed with exertion and happiness. "The fencing for the deer enclosure is almost finished," she reported, accepting the glass of lemonade he offered. "We should be able to accept our first rehabilitation cases next week." "It's amazing what you've accomplished," Yuri said, his arms sliding around her waist. "You were born for this." "We were born for this," Lily corrected him, leaning into his embrace. "I couldn't have done it without you." That evening, after the volunteers had left and the animals were settled for the night, they sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset over the hills. Max and Luna dozed at their feet, exhausted from their day of supervising the construction. "I have something for you," Yuri said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and placed it in Lily's hand. She looked at him, her eyes wide. "Yuri, open it," he encouraged softly. Inside was a ring, elegant but not ostentatious, with a central emerald surrounded by small diamonds. "It reminded me of your eyes," Yuri explained. "And the diamonds, well, they're from my grandmother's wedding band. My mother thought you should have them." Lily's hand trembled slightly. "It's beautiful." Yuri took the ring from the box and held it poised before her finger. "Lily Owens, when Max dragged me across that dog park 6 months ago, I had no idea he was leading me to the rest of my life. You've changed everything: how I work, how I see the world, how I understand happiness. I love you more than I thought possible, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." He paused, his heart in his throat. "Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Lily's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." As he slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a deep kiss, Yuri knew that his greatest success would never be measured in dollars or properties. It would be measured in moments like this, in the life they would build together, in the sanctuary that would heal animals and people alike, in the family they would someday start. Max and Luna stirred at their feet, sensing the shift in energy. As Lily laughed and buried her face in Yuri's neck, whispering "I love you" against his skin, the dogs settled back down, content in the knowledge that their matchmaking was complete. Their humans had found each other, just as they had that day in the park, when a millionaire met his soulmate through an unlikely canine introduction that would change both their lives forever.